Welcome back. Today, voter rights advocates in Pennsylvania are expected to appeal a ruling on that state's controversial voter ID law. A judge refused yesterday to block a law that requires Pennsylvania voters to show a state-issued ID at the polls. Meanwhile, a federal judge in Ohio, another battleground state, heard arguments on a law that would shorten early voting for some Ohio voters. The Obama campaign is challenging that law. Joining us now, Leila McDowell from the Advancement Project, a civil rights group. Thank you so much for your time, Leila.
Thank you, Tamron. How are you?
Fantastic. As we pointed out, advocates in Pennsylvania expected to appeal this ruling, but this perhaps will not come in time for the November general election, correct?
Exactly. We are appealing today. What happened yesterday was a tragic day for American democracy. Hundreds of thousands of eligible voters, mostly seniors, veterans, African Americans, Latinos, and college students may not be able to vote come this fall. They're facing insurmountable hurdles to get this very restrictive voter ID that is now required by the law. And these are people like our plaintiff, Mrs. Vivian Applewhite, 93 years old, marched with Dr. King for the right to vote, has been voting for 50 years. And because there's a discrepancy on her birth certificate, she's not going to be able to vote. The very fundamental right of our democracy is your right to raise your voice on election day, to go in that ballot box and have an equal say in our government. And that is what's being robbed from voters in Pennsylvania today and across the country, unfortunately.
We have at MSNBC certainly been discussing this issue for many months now. When this whole subject came up in Pennsylvania, Michael Smerconish, who's on often, expressed his great concern. I want to read what the judge, Robert Simpson, said about the decision. He's a Republican. He says Petitioners' Counsel did an excellent job of putting a face to those burdened by the voter ID requirement. Petitioner did not establish, however, the disenfranchisement was immediate or inevitable. What do you make of the judge's words there?
Well, like I said, it's a tragic day for our American democracy. First of all, the state has no plan to educate voters. Polls show 35% of voters in Pennsylvania don't even know this law exists. And we know that 758,000, this is the state's own numbers, of people do not have this required voter ID. There is no plan in place that they have released to educate enough voters so that they'll be ready for the fall. And the company that has been charged with implementing this education process for the public is owned by a Romney bundler. We also know that the offices that you have to go to get this strict voter ID in 13 counties is only open 1 day a week. In 9 counties, there's no office at all. These are insurmountable hurdles for vast numbers of Pennsylvania voters who are going to be blocked from the polls. And it's a fundamental undermining of our democracy for partisan gain. We all know, even the judge acknowledged that one of the motivations of this law was a partisan motivation, and we all heard the House Majority Republican leaders say this is what's going to allow Romney to win the state. Obama carried that state by 622,000 votes. We know from the state that 758,000 people don't have this voter ID, and they are the demographics that fundamentally turned out in 2008 and voted Democratic.
What kind of feedback did you hear from people today in the state?
People are confused. People are confused. They don't know if their voter ID is going to work or not. College students have ID, but 85% of the colleges don't present the kind of ID with the expiration stamp that they need on it to get the restrictive voter ID. Veterans, they don't have the ID that is going to qualify for this very strict voter ID that the judge has now imposed. So they're confused. Some people are going to go to the polls and just be turned away. They're going to find the door to democracy slammed shut in there, and they will not be able to exercise the franchise. Others are going to find insurmountable hurdles to try to get that voter ID in time for the fall.
Leila McDowell with the Advancement Project, civil rights group. Thank you so much. We greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And we've been